Thank you, Yair and Jonathan. It's always good to see you. Grateful to have you back with us again. I think the last time we talked was, I believe it was in February. So it's good to have you back with us. And as usual, there's a lot for us to cover. So just the brief framing, I think our audience knows very well the events we've all been living through, but just very briefly, since October 7th, 2023, on that horrible day when Hamas attacked Israel, we've seen Israel engage in simultaneous wars on multiple fronts against Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. And over the past 2 weeks, we saw the war enter a new phase with Israel launching direct strikes against the Islamic Republic and Iran and their nuclear infrastructure. So our goal for tonight is to unpack both the strategic, diplomatic, and security implications of these developments, both for Israel and the wider region. So, Jonathan, thank you as always. It's great to have you with us. Looking forward to learning from you and hearing your analysis. I'm just going to start with a pretty big question for you. They're calling the war with Iran the 12-day war. In those 12 days, Israel was able to target not only Iranian infrastructure and missile sites, but they were also able to eliminate key nuclear scientists and senior military figures, which Israel is calling a stunning success. I'm really curious to know, in your view, how much damage was truly done to Iran's nuclear ambitions, its military capabilities, and what that means for its regional influence. Also curious to know, does this change the long-term strategic balance between Israel and Iran, and specifically at this time when Israel has basically defanged two of Iran's biggest proxies, in Hezbollah and Hamas? So I know I teed a lot up for you there. And
I was going to say, you're starting off nice and easy with me here. Okay, let me try to break this down in a few ways. First, let's talk about that BDA, as they call it, the battle damage assessment, which everybody's arguing about right now in the American media. I think that on the night that Donald Trump struck or ordered the strike on the nuclear program in Iran, I think there was some irrational exuberance, perhaps not out of character for Donald Trump. And the general sense that we got from him was, that this program was obliterated. I think that was the exact word that he used. That's not a word that anybody uses when they talk about battle damage assessments, right? It's much more technical. And so 12 hours later, we saw Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, get up with his generals at the Pentagon and provide a more nuanced perspective. But I think it was still overwhelmingly positive. And that was the narrative for, a solid day or so. Then we saw this strange leak coming out of the Defense Intelligence Agency, where they were saying that the program was only set back by months. But if you note, they talked about it being a low confidence report, meaning that it was still interim. They were still assessing. And I will tell you that just about an hour ago, I got in my inbox a statement from the director of the CIA, Director Ratcliffe, and he just came out with a statement saying that severe damage was done to the Iranian nuclear program. What I hear from Israel is that we're talking about years, right? Not months, but years, that it was set back significantly. And that's, I think, due not just to the MOPS that these B-2s dropped, not just the massive ordnance penetrators, these massive weapons, 30,000-pound bombs that were dropped on the nuclear sites, but on top of that, you had the Israelis hunting down and killing 14 Iranian nuclear scientists, the administrators of the Iranian nuclear program, the IRGC officials that were also responsible for the development of this program. And then on top of that, the destruction wrought by the United States. So you start to add it all up. And what you begin to realize is that even if there was a certain amount of enriched uranium that was spirited out of one of the facilities, who is going to work on enriching it? What centrifuges are they going to use to enrich it? And then there's I think the broader question, which is, would Iran in its right mind try to resurrect a program that had brought such disaster upon this, right? And so I think the answer is probably not for a while. They could try to make a dash for a dirty bomb or something along those lines, but I think it would be suicide. for the regime, especially because right now I think they still have no air defenses. They don't have an air force. They don't have the ability to defend themselves. And we saw that very clearly as the Israelis enjoyed complete and total air superiority in the skies over Iran for 12 days. They had no answer to the Israelis as they went around hunting for assets, whether they be ballistic missiles or nuclear facilities or military sites, gas, oil, factories, construction areas. I mean, it was remarkable what the Israelis were able to do. And I just don't think that the Iranians are going to have the stomach for this, at least not right now. Doesn't mean that at some point they may try to get themselves up off their back, but they are in bad shape right now. Now, the one thing that I will just note, though, is that this is not a complete and total victory for, I think, a few reasons. Number one is there are probably still loose assets out there belonging to the nuclear program. It doesn't mean that they are going to be able to resurrect it. It just means that that there are things that the Israelis didn't destroy. And there's a reason for that, right? The Israelis, they're a tiny country of 10 million people, smaller than the state of New Jersey, and they went and attacked a country twice the size of the state of Texas with 9 times the population of Israel. They were not going to get everything. They never were going to get everything, but they did the big stuff, right? And when you look around at what's been hit, it's a lot. But what they couldn't do is end the threat of those ballistic missiles. That's the one thing that they could not neutralize and probably were never going to neutralize. And so when the Iranians started with, let's say, around 2,000 or 2,500 ballistic missiles, my understanding is they're now down to probably under 1,500. And to make matters worse for the regime, they had probably about 600 or 700 missile launchers, which is what you need to put these missiles on in order to fuel them and then to shoot them. And right now they're down under 300. So the Israelis have done terrific work all around by reducing the threat, the nuclear threat, the military threat, the conventional threat. The Air Force is gone. I mean, all of these things I think are wonderful. But I think we need to understand that there are always going to be limitations in terms of total victory. You're not going to see total victory. But just to put this into historical context, and we'll leave it there. When we talk about the miraculous victory of 1967 by the Israelis in the 6-Day War, they also did not achieve like a surrender on the part of the surrounding Arab states. They shellacked them, and it bought them 6 years of peace. I hope this buys Israel more than 6 years of peace. And I think that's really what we need to be thinking about here right now is, can Israel take this time to rebuild? It's got some rebuilding to do. It's got some new thinking to do about its defense constructs and the paradigm. It's got lessons that it has to learn. But then, there's one other thing that I think is just out there. Maybe we'll talk about it is, what do you do about the the Hamas problem? Because you still have hostages and you still have a war that isn't quite finished there. Even if all of the other fronts have been neutralized, there is still that sort of gaping wound that the Israelis have right now when they think about the hostages. So I don't know, hopefully that kind of answers your question there. Happy to take more.
Jonathan, thank you again for joining us, and it's really good to see you again. And we know how busy you are, and we really appreciate your time. So the next question is actually my question, but also there's 4 questions pretty much identical on the chat. And it's related, building on what you just mentioned. I'm Israeli American, and I remember that I lived in the 1990s in Israel when the Iraqis threw missiles, the Scads back. But these missiles were, they caused some damage, but it was on a different scale. What we have seen in Israel in the last few weeks is something that we have never seen ever. Like the damage that each one of these ballistic missiles has caused is unbelievable. And yet, with this war, there was so much excitement from Israel and also Jews across the world against what we're doing to Iran, because they have been our literally mortal enemy, directly and indirectly. Hezbollah, Assad, Houthis, Shmouthis, all of that for so long have caused. So there was so much excitement about the fact that we are, the sky is open and we're doing pretty much whatever we want. But this leads to the next question. And the next question is, which is everybody's thinking about, is what about the regime, the Ayatollah, Khamenei, the Revolutionary Guards? what is the assessment, the professional assessments? It's not a very stable or liked regime as it is, but with everything that has happened the last 2 weeks, is this going to accelerate the change?
So look, I think the answer is, in short, we don't know. But I will say that there are a couple of scenarios that we're looking at right now, and I think they're important to play out. One is the question of a total surrender on the part of the regime against Israel and the United States. If that happens, and I don't think there's a high likelihood for this, you could see internal dissent, inside Iran, a recognition that the regime is, weak, and it could create some of the change that we're talking about. I am not sure that the regime would be willing ever to surrender to the great Satan and the little Satan. Right, you're talking about the United States and Israel. These are the two most hated countries by the regime. I cannot imagine this, but I think we need to at least have in our heads what happens when the Islamic Republic does this. It maybe ceases to become the Islamic Republic if it acknowledges defeat along these lines. There is the question of a popular uprising, and on that, we saw the crown prince of the former regime, the one that was in power until 1979, the son of the Shah. He went to Paris and called upon the people to rise up and to bring down the regime. And of course, the people hate the regime. It is repressive.
The last
it has squandered all of its resources. Think about what it could have built with all the oil money or it should be. I'm sorry, I cut out.
Yeah, you
Hello?
don't have.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you don't
Can you
have.
hear me?
Reception. We can hear you, but in and out.
Okay. Has it been like that the entire time?
Just in the last 20 seconds.
Okay. Hopefully it's better.
Yeah, I think we're back.
Okay.
If it happens again, do you have a backup computer somewhere or Wi-Fi?
I am on my phone at the APAC building because I've got a speech right after this.
Got it.
So
Okay.
doing my best. I can try to move to another place near a window if you tell me that it's bad.
Right now it's okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. I found a quiet conference room. That was the best I could do. So I talked about the one option, which is capitulation, which I don't see as very likely. I think there is the option of the crown prince calling for the downfall of the regime and watching the people. There is also another option, internal dissent from within the IRGC, from within the clerics, that the supreme leader of Iran has led the country to complete ruin over the last 12 days, and that might be the thing that spurs change inside the region. It would bring additional regime figures to power, but they may be more pragmatic. It's hard to imagine them being worse. There's one other scenario that I think is probably very realistic right now, and the one that I think is the most likely, which is if you look at Lebanon or Syria, and you look at what has happened to those proxies of Iran and how they were completely defeated by Israel, but yet did not surrender. There is a situation right now where Israel is watching those territories, looking for threats, and the moment they see a threat, they send an aircraft or a weapon and they neutralize that threat. And that could be the way that things persist in Iran for quite some time. The only real risk with that scenario, of course, is that the regime would still be able to fire the occasional ballistic missile at Israel in response to such an attack. But these are the sorts of scenarios we think about as we wonder whether the regime is still capable of maintaining power.
Thank you, Jonathan. And you mentioned Lebanon, you mentioned Syria, two places that I actually wanted to ask you about tonight, because there has been some chatter going on about potential normalization deals between Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. Even Steve Witkoff today is talking about that there's potentially new countries on the verge of joining the Abraham Accords, and he made it sound like it could be a couple of countries, one country, or maybe many countries. So How real are those developments? And, what would that mean for the future of Iran's influence in the region if Israel were to normalize relations specifically with Syria and Lebanon?
So it's a fascinating question. I'll give you I really each country, Lebanon and Syria, I think have kind of two different sets of circumstances that I think require just a bit of analysis. With Lebanon, right now the Israelis are thrilled with how things are going there. They have been destroying Hezbollah assets every day or almost every day. And it usually comes from intelligence that the Israelis identify a threat. They share it with the Lebanese government. They ask the Lebanese if they would like to neutralize the threat themselves. Almost always, the Lebanese government is unable. The Israelis neutralize the threat, and both sides are happy because they have kept Hezbollah from rising up. I met with a senior Israeli official in April, and I asked him about how that mechanism was going. And he said that he believed that if things keep going in this direction, that he could imagine normalization with Lebanon within the year. And so what we're hearing right now out of Witkoff's office and out of other places is not inconsistent with what I've heard. I think it might be a little early to suggest that it would happen now, but I would not be unhappy about it because I think there is a mechanism in place that can sustain it. And I think that would be wonderful. With Syria, I'm a little bit more ambivalent. And I'll tell you why. 5 months ago, this was a country that was under the rule of Bashar al-Assad. Or 6 months ago now, I guess. And the guy that took over, right, Ahmed al-Shara, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, as he's known, he was an al-Qaeda leader, right, 6 months ago. And right now he is standing atop of an apparatus that is filled with jihadis. And so the country itself is not inclined to peace. The bureaucracy, the military, there's literally, I would be hard pressed to find any part of the bureaucracy that wields real power right now that would welcome the idea of normalization with Israel when they have al-Qaeda kind of ideology running through their brain. And what I really worry about right now is, you may have seen there was an attack against the church in Syria, and there was a new group that had never been identified before, a jihadi organization, and people were wondering whether it was a splinter of the Assad regime or if it was a splinter of ISIS. Nobody knows, although the theory right now is that it may be a splinter of al-Jolani's group itself. And in other words, what we could be seeing is an internal threat to the regime because it is pragmatic, because it has decided to not engage in hostility with Israel. And so if you ask me, I mean, I obviously would welcome the idea of normalization between Syria and Israel. It's a dream come true. But timing is everything. And I don't think we need to rush it, because I think the seeds are already being laid here. I think what we really need is to make sure that there is an apparatus, that there are structures in place to help sustain normalization. And again, I think Lebanon has it. Syria, I think it's still being built.
Thank you, Jonathan. One of the guests here who was attending is the president and the founder of one of the sponsoring organizations for this talk, which is the American Jewish Medical Association, Yael. And she's always very involved. And she actually has a very interesting question that I think is relevant to what you have been discussing the last few meetings, and it's the power and the influence of Qatar on our universities, our institutions. So what her question is what are your thoughts about the Qatar influence now with all the, the tectonic shifts, with Iran going down and weakening? What is the expected, future of the financial and other influence of Qatar and other forces on our institutions?
Okay, great question. And hi, Yael, nice to hear from you. I would say this, that I think the Qataris prior to this war appeared to be surging in their power in Washington, their financial power, the 747 jet that was offered to Donald Trump, the $1.2 trillion in reported deals that were being struck between the United States and the Qataris. Donald Trump loves a good deal, loves to be able to say that he's brought in more money to the United States to improve the financial situation of everyday Americans. I will say that the last couple of days of this war were, for me, poetic. Because when you think about how the Gaza war began on 10/7, this was a terrorist group sponsored by both Iran and Qatar that attacked Israel. And then they both sat back and watched as the region lit up in flames. 7 fronts this war was waging. And Iran and Qatar never had to pay a price. Suddenly, Iran finds itself under fire from the United States. Nuclear programs destroyed after 12 days of getting absolutely hammered by the Israelis. And after the bombing is over, the Iranians signaled that they need to do something to save face. They need to do something in response. So what do? They attack the other financial patron of Hamas. And I have to say that when Hamas's 2 patrons start firing at each other, something has gone horribly wrong with their war plan. And I will raise my glass to that, because I think there is poetry in what we've just witnessed. Now, I still think the Qataris have a free pass in Washington. They have unbelievable soft power. They have influence in higher education. They have influence in K through 12. They have influence among lobbyists in Washington and public relations firms, members of Congress, business, high tech, Wall Street. It is unbelievable how much power they have, and I don't see a way of rolling them back yet. The good news is they don't have any military power. What they have is financial power. And what needs to be happening now is that we need to expose all of the corruption, all of the things that we're watching right now. They have their tentacles in all over this country, and we need to expose it. We need to actually reveal the amount of money. We need to reveal the corruption. And that, I think, is the only way that we're going to be able to roll this back. And unfortunately, I probably can't imagine that happening until probably another American leader is in the White House.
So while we're on the topic of Qatar, I think we should get into Gaza a little bit and the future of Hamas, with both the U.S. and Qatar suggesting that a ceasefire between Israel and Iran creates more momentum for a ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. Do you see that as genuine progress, or is it just optimism? And finally, can we trust Qatar to be a neutral and fair mediator in these negotiations? Did you catch my question?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the last question, the answer is absolutely not. Yeah. All right, I'm going to move. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we
I'm
can
going
hear
to
you.
try to move to another part of. All right, I'm going to try to move out of this office. It sounds like this is not a great place. Let me see if I can get a slightly.
In the meantime, while Jonathan is improving his positions, we're getting a lot of excellent questions in the Q&A. Keep on writing them. We're going to try to compile, as you see, we started reaching out immediately to the questions, and keep on writing them, and we'll get to as many of the questions as we can. In the meantime, Jonathan froze for a few seconds, so hopefully he'll recover. Since we have a few seconds, I'll just mention that Jason just came back from a very important. Oh, we lost him completely. Hopefully he'll log. He has the contact, but Jason, while we're waiting for Jonathan, you just participated, I think, in Boston in a very important conference, not at all related to Iran, but I think it's related very much to anti-Semitism and different forces. Maybe you can enlighten us and tell us a little bit about what your experiences have been.
Yeah, so it's a very, very different topic from what we're discussing here tonight. So it feels strange to switch topics like that. But
Yes.
I did attend a 1 week seminar between the Shalom Hartman Institute and Harvard Divinity School for the Black and Jewish Leadership Initiative. So leaders from both communities, from the Black community, from the Jewish community, specifically from nonprofit organizations, university administrators, and people in the sports world came together for a week and learned together, dialogued together, and started talking about the issues facing both of our communities and ways that we can better understand and support one another, restoring the historic link that used to exist between our communities.
Okay, I'm trying to text for Jonathan.
But yeah, that's a different conversation for a different time.
I know, just trying to fill the hole. Yeah, but I mean, I'll just say, if we're going back to Iran, is that I just see the voices from Israel, and I'm sure also from the United States, of how people were so shocked about how abrupt this was. This whole thing of 12 days was just basically so overwhelming. I mean, I know that my sister, who lives in the center of Israel with 2 young kids, this war was hell for her. Like they didn't have a safe room, so they had to run down every time, multiple times a night, and so many people. I mean, the lucky ones had a safe room at home, and some of them were even, those with kids already slept in the safe room. But it was very, very difficult, and the stories it was very, very scary. I don't remember any time like this. I mean, this whole October 7th war has been, the last 21 months has been so horrible for so many of us, but specifically these last couple of weeks have been very, very challenging and difficult for so many people.
Yeah, it's been a horrible 20 months. So it's very interesting from what you said. My best friend in Israel lives on the border of Gaza in Kibbutz Mephal-Sim, and he said he had people from the center of the country coming to stay with him because it was a safer place than center was, which is bizarre. Jonathan's back.
Sorry, guys. I don't know what happened there, but everything kind of conked out on me.
All good.
Yeah.
So we were on the topic of Qatar and Hamas, and Gaza ceasefire. I asked you, what your thoughts are on, what we're seeing in Gaza, where you think it might go, and
Yeah.
and can we trust Qatar to be involved in these negotiations?
Right. And I think the answer on Qatar is absolutely not. They are duplicitous. They are funders of Hamas, while simultaneously trying to act as a broker for the release of hostages. And I just don't believe that that's something that they're truly interested in. And it's for that reason that I don't trust them. I mean, we shouldn't trust them on anything else for that matter. They brokered the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, leading to an embarrassing defeat for the United States. Well, they were simultaneously sponsors of the Taliban. You can see a pattern here. I believe, by the way, that they're heavily involved in the chaos that we've seen here on campus. We've seen Qatari connections to some of the worst groups that I've been tracking as it relates to the campus chaos and the encampments and everything else. So we shouldn't trust them. But I don't think that that our policy is going to change anytime soon. And so I'm concerned about where we are in this country right now as it relates to the Qataris. But in the meantime, I do think that the end of this war with Iran is a moment where Israel should be considering its options. I do believe that this war is probably not particularly healthy any longer for the Israelis, because I'm not sure what they're accomplishing on the battlefield. I understand why they want to keep fighting, because they're trying to, destroy Hamas. But I do wonder whether we've reached the point of diminishing returns with Hamas, because none of the leaders I think 2 leaders are left. I have one of those decks of cards that they were giving out in Israel with the 52 top figures from Hamas, and I believe only 2 of them are still alive right now. So what we're talking about is going after that next level of junior people who are probably not particularly well trained. Many of the young fighters that have joined the ranks of Hamas since the war began, these are young men in tracksuits, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. And the idea of fighting a war against them in this way, I think it's doing more damage to Israel's reputation. You're seeing the Europeans, heck, then the Germans come out and speak out against you. Given the history of Germany's defense of Israel in Europe, I think you get a sense of where we're going. It's not a particularly positive, rosy outlook. And so I do wonder whether Israel, and this is just my theory, and I don't even know if it's something that we can seriously pursue. But just imagine this scenario that Israel says we're ending this war. We've already won against Hamas's patrons. We've won against Hamas's allies around the region. The Seven Front War is essentially over. None of these actors pose any real threat to Israel any longer. And it's for this reason we've stopped fighting in Gaza. However, we are not going to let in one scrap of construction until the hostages are released. And if Hamas refuses to release the hostages, then I think that's where the political pressure will build. And not just the external political pressure, but I think also internally, because the people are miserable. And for a year and a half, they've been living in squalor because of a war that Hamas started that they didn't necessarily want. So, I don't know where this goes. I sincerely would like to see the war end, and not just because I'm tired, after a year and a half of following this conflict, but because I think it's probably no longer a war that's healthy for Israel to fight. I think the country. I was just there last week in Israel as the war started. And I can tell you, I feel tired. And I'm not, I didn't go through half of what the Israeli public has gone through. It's got to be tough for the country. And I do think that after a win, along the lines of what Israel has just accomplished in Iran, I think they should be allowed to rest.
I think, Jonathan, just to comment on what you said, because I think it's so relevant and important. Today, I was reading in the news how the countries in the world, and especially Europe, are basically boycotting any agricultural, including big companies like Aldi from Germany, just boycotting, agriculture from Israel. And I think that if we stop the war, we hear all around us genocide and starvation, and the Hamas are to blame. Don't get me wrong, but the war needs to stop. I agree with you. The anti-Semitism, the hatred that we see, and the anti-Zionism is unbelievable. I'm planning, as we speak, a vacation in Europe, and my mother and my sister and everybody's coming, and we're meeting halfway in a Scandinavian country in Europe. And I'm looking for Airbnbs. Just in the last 24 hours, as I started, 2 people wrote, "Oh, we're now dealing with genocide people and baby killers," and it's all around us. And I do think that stopping this war will also hopefully diminish the level of crazy anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. But that's basically the next question that I have for you is maybe your specialty, Jonathan. This is related to terror on the United States. A lot of the people who are on the campuses, students, etc., they don't remember 9/11. Maybe they weren't even alive in 9/11. And we have not seen any such crazy radical Islam terror on the United States in the last few years. We have heard some, things about Iran activating their terror nests, etc. How likely do you think something like this will be happening in the next year or so?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer the question in terms of likelihood. What I think we can say with certainty is that Iran is the foremost state sponsor of terrorism in the world, right? Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. Look, this is a regime that, when you look at the 9/11 Commission report that came out after the 9/11 attacks, I think it was in either 2004 or 2005, they identified Iran as a patron of Al-Qaeda, right? So this is no joke here, right? This is a country that has cultivated its close ties with a whole range of very dangerous terrorist organizations. In addition, we have seen the Iranians contract out crime families, mafia types, to carry out attacks in the West, including plots that were disrupted here in the United States. And even in places like Europe right now, we have seen this phenomenon where the Iranians have been recruiting children, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. And they've been, recruited to attack Israeli embassies, American embassies, and the like. And so I think any one of those things are possible here. They could activate terror cells, sleeper cells, lone wolves, recruit kids, recruit crime families. I think the big question is, how much has Donald Trump scared the Iranian regime? So in other words, if they really feel like they're deterred, that they're scared, then they would probably stand down. If they're not scared, if they think they can trifle with the United States, then we may see more of this. I certainly think that we'll, at some point soon, start to see attacks, at least attempted attacks, against Israeli targets, as we've seen in the past, the AMIA bombing in Argentina, or attempted attacks in London or Greece. These are the sorts of things that are the hallmark of the regime. So I would expect asymmetric violence. Whether I expect it here in the United States, really hard to say. Back when I worked at the Treasury Department, back when I was in the intelligence community, I could see these sorts of things. I knew of the existence of these cells. I knew they were always a threat, but we also never saw them really manifest in any significant way. So it was a constant lurking threat, but never one that was fully activated. So let's hope that that's the continued trend here. But I'm sure that there are those in Iran seeking revenge.
And how do you see countries like China and Russia and North Korea playing a role in this? And is there any credible intelligence that they're already talking to Iran or helping Iran to start rebuilding its nuclear program?
It's an interesting thing, but the Russians in particular, they sort of stood down during all of this. I thought it was pretty rich when Vladimir Putin's regime comes out and says that war is not the answer. Kind of hilarious, right? Given what we've seen from the Putin regime over the last couple of years in Ukraine. But I saw one item where the Russians were sort of talking about Israel almost like a satellite, because you got to remember there's like 1 million or maybe even as many as 2 million Russian Jews living in Israel. And Vladimir Putin sees himself as kind of the godfather to these Russian Jews. He sees Israel as a place that is, not hostile to Russian interests. Look, it's not a friendly country to Russia, but it's not hostile either. They have a working relationship with the Russians. And I think Putin sort of understood this wasn't his fight. By the way, he's got plenty of other problems to deal with right now in Ukraine. The Chinese, very content to not get involved. The last thing they want is to start expending military assets on the Middle East. It's just simply not, it's not in their interest. They're thinking about their backyard. They're thinking about, Taiwan. They're thinking about the South China Sea. And so they went quiet. And North Korea was just not even, wasn't even part of the discussion. So the CRINC, as we call it, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, really did not look like a formidable axis during these last 12 days. I really did not get a sense that things were, that Iran could lean on its allies in any significant way.
Jonathan, the next question, you may not feel comfortable answering, and if so, that's fine, because I have another question as a backup. And two people actually asked the same question. It's not related to the Iran. It's related to anti-Semitism, progressive Democrats, etc., on the United States. And people have been shocked in the last 24 hours about somebody who, the person who won the Democratic primaries in New York for mayor, as a person, who is blatantly anti-Zionist. He's, proved it again and again. Yet New York is probably the city, or it is the city with the greatest population of Jews outside of Israel. So how do you have any insights or thought about this? Because it bothers a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't follow New York politics. I've read, you know, as little as I could on this, while still trying to stay informed. But I'm sort of struck by this idea of, we talked about at the beginning of the conflict in Gaza, where you had, lesbian and gays for Palestine, and we would joke that they were like chickens for KFC. That they were in support of a movement that certainly would not support their rights. And I think that, when you see Jewish people come out and vote for someone who's an anti-Zionist, I think it's ultimately incredibly self-defeating. And I truly can't explain how this occurred. It is, I think, shocking, and there are a lot of people that are very worried about the character of New York after all of this. But I think it's a sign. And yeah, I mean, you had sort of mentioned that you would hope that maybe we would see, the anti-Semitism beginning to subside. I think that what we're watching right now with this vote and with some of the other phenomena that we're watching across the United States, not just in the electoral realm, but of course we have, popular members of Congress and the Squad and things like that. But I think we're seeing the normalization of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, that, it's sort of become almost a normal platform. I think that the Jewish community right now, the pro-Israel community, has a lot of work to do. And it's funny, I mean, I'm sitting here right now in the office of AIPAC, and I know they're doing a lot of work to try to combat this. And they're working on primaries, and they're identifying, better candidates or different candidates as alternatives to anti-Zionist ones. But I do think that there's a political battle underway right now, and New York was one major battleground, but it's certainly not the last. And I think that we're going to see the need for more groups getting involved in politics and trying to swing things the other way, because boy, have we watched things deteriorate significantly. And it's really amazing. I mean, just to point, maybe it's obvious, but that anti-Semitism surged amidst the murder of 1,200 Jews. And I mean, that's when it first came out. It was even before the Israelis launched their attack against Hamas. And that does, I think, give you a sense here that the anti-Semitism that we're watching, it's not directly connected to the war. And yet here you were saying that maybe the anti-Semitism would subside if the war ended. I'm not sure of that. And of course, I say that with no glee. I'm very worried about what that means if it's not connected to the war at all. That in fact, it's just, it's about something deeper. It was something latent that came out, and it came out as soon as they saw Jewish blood spilled.
That's terrifying. I have no
Yes.
words, but I'm also hopeful that your wife, you told me last time that your wife always says that you're pessimistic, and I hope that you're wrong and we will see an improvement. To the next question, going back to Iran, a couple of people were asking about, and you may not know this, but specifically, the heart of nuclear weapon is partially enriched uranium. And yes, they bombard, including the Americans and the Israelis, a lot of sites, including the bunker buster, etc. But how do we know? I mean, there's a lot of hearsay that a lot of the enriched uranium was basically just because they knew it's coming, so they just removed it to other sites. And perhaps they still have a lot of enriched uranium that they can, so maybe they're not so much behind, years behind it with support of North Korea and whatever, they'll be on track fairly quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this, and just to be clear, I'm not a nuclear scientist. There are a lot of people who are playing one on TV right now. People that purport to have like real deep technical knowledge of physics. I am not one of those guys. But I mean, let me just put people's minds at ease here, and I will be less Dr. Doom right now than my previous answer. The scientists have been killed. The conversion facilities that turn gas into metal have been destroyed. The centrifuges that are used to spin the uranium and to turn it from 60% to weapons grade 80+%, they don't have the facilities any longer to do these sorts of things. So yes, there could be some 60% enriched uranium floating around somewhere in Iran right now, but that does not mean that the regime has the immediate means to convert it into something that could be dangerous toward Israel. There's no guarantees in this world, right? But I would say that from what we saw and the estimates that we're starting to get, it just seems highly unlikely that the regime will have this. I don't want to say that the chances are zero, but I will say that the likelihood does not seem high right now, and I think we have to go with that and bank it. I'll take the positive news wherever I can get it.
Like that. And we could all use more and more positive news in our lives these days. You know, I'm very proud of what Israel did in the war. I think they made some incredible achievements. Over those 2 weeks, we did keep hearing reports that there was a possibility that they knew where Khomeini was hiding and that they could take him out, but the decision was made not to assassinate him. Do you think that was the correct decision? Do you know why that decision was made?
I don't. I think that if the Israelis had the chance, I think they were probably very tempted, because I think it would have meant the end of the regime as we knew it. But I will say this, that part of what's going on here is the Israelis are trying to be very judicious about strikes that kill Iranians. They understand that the Iranian people are probably their best asset if regime change is to ever happen. And so the idea of bombing civilian areas, doing damage to national symbols, I think they're wise to try to steer clear of that, at least for now. You know, if they need to, because of, you know, an escalating war, and they think that that's the last chance they have to neutralize the regime's decision makers at a time where Israel is in great peril. Okay, you know, I could possibly see that, but I think that when they look at the win and they look at the possibility now that the people of Iran may rise up against this, you know, corrupt, autocratic, you know, 80-something-year-old man who has led the country to disaster. I think this guy's got plenty of problems on his hands right now. I would not want to be him as he climbs out of that bunker. I think the people of Iran are unhappy with him. I think the regime is unhappy with him because he failed to deliver on all of the military aims. You know, I mean, I think there's probably no greater symbolic, other than the Iranians attacking Qatar. The other part of the war that I will never forget was when the clock in Palestine Square was destroyed, the clock counting down to the destruction of the so-called Zionist regime. That's gone, right? All of the things that this guy said he was going to do have failed to happen, and now he's got to face the music. And so I'd actually rather have the Iranian people handle this guy than having the Israelis do it for them and risk provoking a population that I think is already really not happy with this particular Ayatollah and the regime that he's helped to create.
Jonathan, we're mindful of your time, and we'll stop in about 5 minutes. But just about what you said now, there was a comment from the Q&A that mentioned that it's interesting and kind of sad that probably the vast majority, over 50%, maybe 80% of the, and I don't know if it's true or not, but of the Iranian people are not happy with the regime. But the minority, the 20% who are in power, they have the weapons, they do mass executions, you know, they throw people to the besiege and to the prisons. So it's not so easy to do. The next question that I'm going to combine 3 questions, and it's specifically about Qatar. People are asking about the Qatarian money and how is it true that it's really funding the Muslim anti-Semite organizations in the United States? I think that we know the answer because you mentioned it in the previous ones, but also specifically, what is the motive? Armand was asking, what is the motive and the gains of the Qatarians to support all of this? You know, what's behind them? What are they trying to do?
Yeah. So, I mean, we know that there are groups that are being funded by the Qataris that are toxic in nature, Muslim Brotherhood adjacent or Muslim Brotherhood directly involved. And it's stoking anti-Semitism, it's stoking radical Islamism, political Islamism. And so lots of reason to be concerned. But the money itself, I mean, we have a project where we're looking at how much money the Qataris are spending around the United States. We don't have an exact number yet, and we're still counting. But by our count, at least for now, and this is really, like as they say in Hebrew, kesef katan, right? This is a small amount. I think it's a fraction of what we're likely going to find. We have found $220 billion that the Qataris have sunk into this country over the last decade or so. It's higher education, and we can see the impact of that. You know, administrations have just been indifferent to the anti-Semitism and radicalism they've seen on campus. We see it at K through 12. It's beginning to influence kids between the ages of 5 and 18, which is, of course, absolutely frightening when you think about what they may be being taught. Lobby groups, right, to try to influence Washington, public relations groups to try to influence the media. And what they're doing all across the board, by the way, I mean, just putting money in the pockets of politicians, putting money into joint ventures and hedge funds and, and bond funds. I mean, the amount of money that they are throwing around right now has made them indispensable business partners and indispensable philanthropists. And what it's done is it's bought them soft power. This is not a country that has hard power. It doesn't have a military. I mean, our military is on their base right now in Qatar, and it is serving as a deterrent against countries that may wish to do Qatar harm. What they need, if they don't have a military, is they need to have influence. And that's what they're buying up in the United States. And we can see it at the state level. We can see it at the federal level. We can see it in nonprofits. We can see it in for-profits. They are very smart with the money that they control. And just to be clear, the money is insane. This is a country of 330,000 citizens, only 330,000 citizens, and they control more than 10% of the world's energy. They are able to mint money as fast as they can spend it with zero overhead because they don't have people to feed. They don't have infrastructure to build. They've already done it. There's nothing that anybody needs in that country. And so the government is able to throw it around and to amass influence. And that is what they're doing. And that means that people are going to be more tolerant toward Hamas. They're going to be more tolerant toward the Muslim Brotherhood. They're going to be more tolerant toward Islamist ideology in general. And you ask yourself, I mean, this new this guy that just beat Cuomo, Mamdani, the Queen Mother of the Emir of Qatar was, posting things on Instagram about him and in support of him. In other words, it seems like the Qataris may be behind, some of this as well. They're dabbling in politics. So we've got, I think a lot of concerns right now about Qatari influence and Qatari money. I'd like there to be an official investigation. I'd like for Congress to be, combing through the financial records, trying to figure out exactly how much money is out there and how much influence they bought and how much of it is illegal. We haven't seen anything like that yet. And that's troubling for me. But I do think that there's greater awareness. If there's one good thing that's come out of this war, it's that people, I don't think most Americans could have pointed to Qatar on a map. Now everybody's concerned about it. And that's important.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Jonathan, really want to thank you for your time, for sharing all of your analysis with us, especially on a night that's busy for you, where you're doing a speaking engagement immediately after this. You've definitely given us a lot to think about, a lot for us to consider. And the last thing I'll ask you is just if you have any final words or any final predictions that you want to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, apologies for the technical difficulties here. I usually try to stay on a call when I get on it. Look, I'll just say this, that I think Israel has done a magnificent job in this war. I think the people of Israel are unbelievably resilient and defiant. And I think the Israelis did what they should have done, which is to play to their strengths. When this war started, they were caught off guard. They had to fight a war right on their own border, right on their own turf. And that went against every fiber of Israel's military doctrine. What we now are seeing is Israel going back to its form, right? They are fighting wars on the enemy's turf. They're taking it to the enemy, and they're winning on on the enemy's turf. And they're doing it with support of the United States, which is a huge boost as well. And the Arab world is watching. They can see that the Israelis have found their strength again, that they're using intelligence, that they're using their brain power as well as their military brawn. And I think that is going to send shockwaves through Iran's so-called axis of resistance. I think they're still coming to grips with the horrific loss that they've just suffered. And I do think that there are going to be other countries that look right now to Israel and to the United States for an alliance structure that could offer them safety and security. And so that's a good thing all around. I'm hopeful that we're getting near the end of this conflict because Lord knows we've all watched this go on for far too long. I'd like to see a little peace in the Middle East. And I'd like to come back on and talk about a thriving Jewish community in Philadelphia and maybe another Eagles Super Bowl the next time we chat.
God willing, your mouth to God's ears.
Toda, Jason, toda, Jonathan, and have a good night and good luck with your talk in APEC.
Thank you. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.